Whoa! It seems I've stumbled into a new distant land out of simulated universe. Hey guys, Mr. Kafka here, back with another video. For today's episode of CN Unit Analysis, we're gonna be featuring myself. There's quite a lot of things to cover for myself because as you guys would have known by now, Kafka is our new flavor of the year for Honkai Star Rail because I don't think any other character has been as hyped as I have been, right? Whole new mechanic, DOT trigger, team compositions, Lightcone Recommendations, all that kind of good stuff. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into today's content. Queen of DOT, Mommy of Trailblazer. Sim for her or not, Kafka is here. Kafka is our most anticipated and hyped unit since 1.0 and she has the popularity and adoration from numerous players. So she is the foundation of current and future DOT comps due to the trigger mechanic on her skill and ultimate, effectively doubling a DOT's damage. This is extremely valuable for players who want to play DOT over the traditional boring crit ratio DPS. Due to how new Kafka's style is compared to other traditional carries, this analysis it will definitely be more in-depth, covering more things. Likely I'm gonna be posting a separate video covering the specific team comps because as you guys would have seen by now from the previous video, making a team composition with Kafka is not strictly limited to just making DOT units. So team composition is gonna be a whole other topic that I'll be dedicating to the next video. Now with regards to common misconceptions, first one being despite being a DOT applier, Kafka actually does not need much if any EHR at all, unless you have her Eidolon 1 or you have put for a signature Lightcone. And to understand this common misconception, we're going to be taking a look further in our Relic recommendation section where we will be going through her EHR requirements. Number 2, while DOTs themselves, they do not crit, right? The DOTs don't crit and the DOT triggers don't crit. The initial damage portion from Kafka's basic abilities, skills, ultimate, as well as talent, they can still crit, right? Hence, this is why crit Ka is still a possible, it is still a viable build. And this, of course, will also be explained later below in the Relic recommendation section. But just a little summary, it is not as good nor easy to build as compared to attack/speed Kafka. Number 3, DOTs applied from Toughness Break, namely Wind Shear, Fire Burn, Lightning Shock, and Physical Bleed, they can all be triggered by Kafka. It is not just limited to DOTs from skills, any DOTs from Weakness Break can also be triggered by Kafka. And this kind of links up to the next sentence, which is of all the 4 elements, Physical has the highest multiplier when it comes to a break DOT, followed by Wind Shear at 5 stacks. So for those of you guys who want to pair Kafka with a physical team, right, such as Clara or Shu Sheng, that can break the enemies pretty efficiently, Kafka can make use of the physical bleed triggered by a physical break. Number 4, Kafka's Eidolon 4, it applies to her breaks on top of their own abilities, right? As long as it's a shock, it can be applied. And furthermore, it is multi-targeted. So when you use this against a mob, you're going to generate 2 energy from every single time you trigger shock on a mob. So it is possible to even achieve a 1-turn ultimate in mobs with multiple lightning weaknesses. And this will be explained further in the Eidolon section below. Number 5, while Kafka's skill and ultimate are AoE, her skill is not really very efficient at clearing mobs since only the main target's DOT is triggered whenever we use Kafka's skill. So ideally, we want to use our skill with Kafka onto the main target itself while we wait for our ultimate to come up and then make use of our ultimate to clear the mobs instead. But generally speaking, if you want to compare Kafka's AoE mob clearing abilities, I would say she's slightly suboptimal as compared to the likes of Qingyuan or Blade. Number 6, which is a follow-up on number 5, Kafka's ideal matchup would be versus multiple elite bosses, right? Since her ultimate applies shock to all targets and excellent example over here is gonna be MOC 10's Phase 1, where you fight against 2 decaying shadows at the end, and both of them have lightning weakness. And these enemies, you want to hit them as frequently as possible because the Binding of the Golden Order, it goes up to 9 stacks, so every single time you hit them, it minuses 1 stack. And Kafka, she does hit all enemies, even though her skills multiplier is not very high for the non-primary target, right? So that's gonna be an excellent matchup for Kafka. And lastly, Kafka's talent, it only triggers on an ally's basic attack, but this also includes enhanced basic attack, such as QQ's enhanced basic attack or Luca's enhanced basic attack. So feel free to go ahead and use your basic attack, and Kafka will be happily able to proc her talent. And that's all for Kafka's common misconceptions. Now, before we move on to the following chapters, I have decided to categorize my CN unit analysis a little bit better thanks to my friendly editor, which is also helping me out with Mr. Pokey's online website page, where I will be compiling all our CN unit analysis into a single website. So my friend Abud over here has provided the relevant feedbacks, and I will be categorizing my CN unit analysis in the following new format. I believe that it is much easier to follow along as compared to the previous format. Now with that out of the way, let's go back to the original video, which this is going to be known as character kit from now on, which will be covering trace priority, unit special mechanics, as well as their Eidolon benefits. Now, on the first point of character kit, which is the trace priority, Kafka's ultimate will be her biggest priority when it comes to traces, followed by her skill, followed by her talent. Now, why is this the case? That's because the ultimate DOT multiplier has the highest increase when it comes to levels, up to 290% at level 10, which is currently our highest DOT multiplier in the entire game. This is also applied by our talent's follow-up, so whenever Kafka casts her follow-up attack, it is going to proc our ultimate DOT multiplier, and this is why Kafka's ultimate is going to be her highest priority. Following this, Kafka's skill is going to be taking a priority over her talent, because leveling our talent only increases our talent's initial damage with no other effects, while if we were to level up our skill, it increases our DOT multiplier as well as the trigger multiplier. So that's going to be a trace priority for her abilities. Now, with regards to Ascension 2, 4, and 6, Torture is gonna be our key trace to unlock, because it is the trace that allows us to trigger all DOTs with Kafka's skill and ultimate. So this is extremely important if we're gonna be building Kafka as a DOT enabler. However, if players are only interested in a hyper carry Kafka, and that's to say, if you guys have seen my previous video, if you only want to use Kafka with Ting Yun, Asta, and a healer, or rather a Kafka with 2 supports and a healer, then Torture is not going to be as impactful as compared to Taunts, right? We should unlock Taunts first, because unlocking Taunts first will drastically reduce our EHR requirements to all our abilities, since our base chance for all our abilities is now at 130%. And lastly, Plunder is just not that useful, since Kafka already naturally outs every 3 turns with a follow-up attack and no energy regeneration rogue. Plunder is still a very good trace to unlock, especially when we kill mobs with our skills and our ultimates, and this can potentially allow us to have a 2-turn ultimate or even a 1-turn ultimate if we do have Kafka's Eidolon 4. So that is her trace priority. Now, with regards to Kafka's special mechanic, it's definitely going to be her dot trigger, right? Her damage over time trigger. And this is the ability that makes Kafka Kafka. DOT trigger, it is the most future-proof mechanic for any DOT comps, since it effectively doubles your DOT damage output without affecting the number of turns remaining. That's to say, even if you trigger the target's DOT, the number of turns remaining on the DOT is still exactly the same, right? Given its universal application for all DOTs, even at E0, Kafka's future-proofness can be extremely strong as long as players want to use a DOT composition. And keep in mind, this was actually not the case in CBT, as Kafka triggering all DOTs was actually locked behind her Eidolons. And miHoYo actually now moved this ability to an E0 trace. So because of this, Kafka can now enable DOTs for all units, even at E0. So for that, let's give a salute to miHoYo over there, right? Thanks, miHoYo. As mentioned earlier in the common misconception, the DOT triggers includes DOTs from all allies as well as DOTs from weakness break. However, keep in mind that this is only DOTs, right? So ice and quantum break damage will not be included because they are not DOTs, they are only delayed damage. For further clarifications, kindly check out the in-game description for each elemental break, and it will go through exactly which element is a DOT and which element is not a DOT. Currently, the two biggest DOTs to be applied other than Kafka itself, because Kafka does have our highest DOT multiplier at 290% in the ultimate, is going to be Sampo's 5 times talent wind shear at 260% level 10, and Luca's skill, which caused a bleed at 338% at level 10. Keep in mind that although Luca's bleed says is 24% of a target's max HP, it will never exceed 338% of Luca's attack, and that's why we're just gonna take Luca's skill as 338% instead of 24% max HP. Now, the benefits of using either Sampo or Luca will be further explained in team compositions, and this will likely be in a separate video, but just the gist of it, in raw damage, in raw single target damage, Luca will be higher than Sampo, while Sampo can be a little bit more skill point friendly because he can generate wind shear, especially if you want to give him a little bit of EHR. He can generate up to 3 stacks of wind shear just using his basic attack alone. Furthermore, Sampo does perform better than Luca since he does have AoE abilities on both his skill and his ultimate. Now, for the final point with Kafka's special mechanic, it is that Kafka's DOT trigger damage, it is tied to her ultimate and her skill. So if we do not level Kafka's ultimate and skill, this will result in lower overall DOT damage than the original DOT. So for example, if a DOT damage right now is probably doing like 30,000 for example, if you do not level Kafka's ultimate, this 30,000 damage will not be the trigger, right? It's probably just going to be a 25,000 or 23,000. So for the most part, please level Kafka's ultimate and skill as much as possible. And that's it for Kafka's special mechanic. Now, with regards to the final section of Kafka's character kit, it's going to be her Eidolon Benefits. So as you guys can see from the graph over here, this is Eidolon 1, Eidolon 2, Eidolon 3, 4, 5, and 6. And the percentages are essentially how much more damage Kafka is generating for each of her respective Eidolons. So let's take a look at the very first Eidolon over here, which is going to be Da Capo, 16% additional damage output as compared to E0. All subsequent Eidolons will not generate as high of a damage increase as compared to E1, except for E6, and we're going to get to that a little bit later. Some side effect to this for our E1 is that to make sure our E1 lands with 100% accuracy, we do need a little bit more EHR on Kafka than the usual E0 S0, because the base chance for her E1, it is not affected by her talent where she increases all base chance of all abilities by 30%, right? This Eidolon 1, it is not affected, so the base chance is going to be at 100%. So if you want to trigger this with 100% accuracy, you need a little bit more EHR on Kafka, so just a little side effect. But other than this, this is definitely the biggest increase in additional damage output. Moving on to the second one, Fortissimo. Current performance is not as impactful as E1, roughly an 11% increase as you can see from over here, but this is also due to the limited DOT rosters we have now. And I believe, as well as the CM Bros believe, this Eidolon 2 will be highly favorable for long-term users looking to pull for 5-star DOT units with a much higher DOT multiplier, because the E2 is basically increasing all DOT damage for your entire team by a flat amount, right? So right now, we don't have a very big library of DOT units that has a very high DOT multiplier. Going forward, if we have a 5-star DOT that's a multiplier of like even higher than Kafka, right? Like maybe 330%, 350%, or maybe even just a skill, not even ultimate, then this Kafka's Eidolon 2 is gonna go up in value extremely quickly, right? So if you guys are a long-term investor for Kafka and you guys don't mind spending the extra bucks, her E2 is gonna increase the DOT's performance by a very large margin in the future. Now for Kafka's Eidolons 4, Recitativo, it is popular saying that after unlocking Kafka's Eidolon 4, we can give Kafka an energy regeneration rope to guarantee a 2-turn ultimate. But after CM Bros testing with attack percentage rope, they conclude that attack percentage rope is still a better choice than energy regeneration. Now, why is this the case? And at the end of the day, Kafka dealing more damage is equivalent to Kafka being able to easily clear mobs as compared to a Kafka that deals less damage. So if you're able to easily clear mobs with Kafka, you can pretty much guarantee generating energy for the most part if you're dealing more damage. Imagine if you're trying to clear a mob with Kafka and the mob is left with like 10% HP because your attack is not high enough, and now you have to either leave it there for the next round for Kafka to clear it up, or the mob might just die to like your supports hitting it with your AoE, or the boss killing the mobs, such as the ice fatty eating the mob itself. So in this case, Kafka wouldn't be able to generate the energy. So in conclusion, stick to attack percentage rope and enjoy the occasional 2-turn or even 1-turn ultimate. Now moving on to our final Eidolon on Kafka, and this is a game-changing Eidolon, right? Because it is a massive 38% increase in damage output as compared to E0. As you can see over here, at E5 Kafka does 144% damage, but at E6 it's whopping massive 182%, right? Absolutely massive increase. Now why is this the case? This the case is because if you take a look at Luxurious effects, it is not a damage percentage buff, nor is it attack percentage buff, but it is a direct multiplier buff. Goes up by 156% damage, which means your ultimate at level 10 is now going to be doing 436% DOT damage. Another point is that it extends the shock's duration, but that is not really necessary because Kafka can apply this shock DOT pretty frequently herself, since her ultimate does have almost 2 turns uptime if you already unlock Kafka's Eidolon 4. So not the most important part. The most important part is the absolutely insane damage multiplier increase on her Eidolon 6. So in conclusion, Kafka's Eidolon 6 gives her the highest damage output increase, followed by her Eidolon 1, followed by her Eidolon 2. Now with that being said, Kafka's Eidolon 2 does have more potential future capabilities when better DOT multiplier units are released. Also, Kafka is perfectly functional by E0, but that being said, her Eidolon investments should be considered first before getting Kafka's signature Lightcone, right? So E1 S0 is going to give you more value than E0 S1, and that is because Nihility has an excellent substitute in the form of a Good Night Sleep Well, and S5 Good Night Sleep Well is roughly only a 4 to 5% total damage drop-off compared to a signature one. That is why Eidolon investment should be considered first before her signature Lightcone. Now moving on to Kafka's Relic recommendations, the first one being how much effect hit rate do you need on Kafka. Now because of Kafka's Trace, Torture, the base chance for all abilities are 130%, right? So to put this into perspective, against an enemy with 40 res, you have a 100% accuracy if you have 28.2% EHR, and against an enemy with 35 effect res, you have 100% accuracy with just 18.3% EHR. Now, take note over here, Kafka's Traces actually give her 18% EHR for free. And this is why there are a lot of players going around saying Kafka actually do not need any EHR because you literally have almost 100% DOT uptime even against enemies with 40 res with the free 18% EHR that they have provided for you. Now let's take a look over here, the effect hit rate required, right? So for abilities, a 130% base chance is going to be a 20%, which is the same over here calculated by our CM bros. If you have Kafka's E1 or her S1, they both have a base chance of 100%. So as you guys know by now, base chance of 100% against an enemy with a 40% res is going to be 66.67%. So in this situation, even after factoring in the 18% trace EHR, you do need roughly around 40 to 50% EHR to land your E1/S1 with 100% accuracy. Now this of course can be supplemented with E2 Silverwolf, but I'll just leave you guys to look over here. If you do have E2 Silverwolf, you pretty much just don't need any EHR whatsoever, right? So the chance of you triggering her E1 or S1 over X hits is gonna be as follows, right? At 20% EHR, the chance of you triggering your E1 or S1 against an enemy with 30% res is gonna be 84%, enemy with 40% res is gonna be 72%. But across 3 turns, you're pretty much almost at 100%, right? Even at 20% EHR, you're pretty much almost guaranteed to trigger this over the span of 3 turns. In conclusion, right, unless you're going for Kafka's E1 or S1, only 10% EHR is needed to have 100% DOT accuracy, and even if you are going for Kafka's E1/S1, it is still not advised to sacrifice her attack chest for an EHR chest, since, like I've shown you guys over here in the table, the odds of Kafka landing her E1/S1 at only 20% EHR, it is still around 72% chance, right, to actually land this debuff. You can just think of it as having 72% crit rate versus 100% crit rate. It is nice to have 100%, but even at 72%, it is still pretty accurate. And this probability is just going to go into your favor once you gain even more and more turns, right? So what are the odds of you actually not landing crits, not landing your DOTs 3 consecutive turns at 70% crit rate? So in conclusion, attack percentage chest for Kafka in all cases, and if you do want EHR for Kafka, such as E1 or S1 Kafka, try to aim for them in the subsets instead, right? Now for Kafka's energy threshold, this is actually pretty straightforward. As you guys can just see from the table over here, you can just infer it. In conclusion, right, Kafka do prefer attack percentage rope in every possible scenario to maximize her damage output, because you can see over here at E0, she can cast her ultimate every 3 turns, right? This is the best possible cycles, 3 turns, 3 follow-ups, 1 to 5 energy, cast her ultimate. There's basically no wastage, right? No wastage whatsoever. But if you want to give her energy regeneration rope at E0, you're still lacking 20 energy to ultimate every 2 turns, right? Because you're only at 101. For E4, the guarantee of a 2-turn ultimate, it is still not worth the loss of 43.2% attack, especially in a practical scenario where the likelihood of you 2-turn ulting or even 1-turn ulting with attack percentage ropes are definitely still there due to the mobs generated, right? So that is the conclusion for Kafka's energy threshold. If you guys want to take a closer look, feel free to take a look in the Google spreadsheet yourself, right? Now, with regards to Kafka's relic sets, you can see over here, 4-piece lightning is going to be an excellent choice because the lightning stacks ability, where after a user uses a skill, you gain a 20% attack, it sets in before Kafka's skills hit the enemy. So this will actually affect all her skill multipliers, all her ultimate and all her DOTs. So you do get 20% attack plus 10% lightning damage with lightning 4-piece, right? So considering that Kafka is somebody that wants to use a skill every single turn, there is probably never a turn where you don't want to use Kafka's skill. Lightning 4-piece is going to be an excellent stat for Kafka, and 20% attack is much higher than Musketeer's 12% attack. Other sets to consider can be Musketeer and Hackerspace because they both raise Kafka's most desired stat, which is attack percentage and speed. Due to the efficiency of farming Hackerspace dungeon, and Musketeer is pretty much a free gear you get from clearing Echoes of War every single week, it is perfectly viable for players who do not want to spend stamina in Lightning Dungeon, right? Personally, for me, you can see over here, I am running Musketeers plus Hackerspace 2+2, and I still have a very nice stat of 3.6k attack and 150 plus speed, right? So definitely a viable option over there. With regards to Kafka's 2 planar piece, there are no great alternatives other than Space Sailing Station, because Space Sailing Station is the only one that increases our attack. All the other planar pieces, they are either increasing your crit rate, your crit damage, your energy generation, your brave effect. Like Kafka doesn't really need those, right? You just want Space Sailing Station. That being said, Pan-Galactic could be considered because Pan-Galactic increases your EHR and increases your attack based on your EHR. But because Kafka really does not need much EHR at all, even if you have her E1/S1, the effectiveness of Pan-Galactic is definitely going to be reduced compared to somebody that really wants a lot of EHR plus attack, right? So because of this, there's no other great alternatives for Space Sailing Station. And that is going to be that for Kafka's set recommendations. With regards to her main stats / substats, right? There are basically 2 builds going around right now, which is the meta build of attack / speed. As you can see over here, attack chest, speed boots, attack rope, and lightning damage sphere. We will focus on speed, attack, and then followed by break effect, EHR, and defensive substats, right? The alternative build is gonna be the crit ratio build, right? The crit car build, where you go crit rate chest, speed boots, same rope, same sphere, but your subset is gonna be focusing on your crit ratios, right? Crit rate, crit damage, followed by your attack, followed by a speed, followed by a break. Addressing the crit car versus attack car once and for all, right? Viable, it is not the same as optimal. And this is basically the whole argument I have for crit car versus attack car. Now, one of Kafka's biggest selling point, it is that it allows players to have the ability to make use of the DPS relics that they would otherwise have never ever used, right? You're never ever gonna use an attack plus speed substat relic for a Silly, for a Jingyuan, for your Yanqing, for your Welt, right? only DOT units can make use of these gears that only has attack rolls and speed rolls on them, right? This will heavily reduce a player's stamina inefficiency, as now players will have a lot more relics to utilize in their inventory rather than constantly trying to farm for the crit ratio relics and just basically throwing away everything else, right? You're wasting a lot more stamina if you only want crit ratio. With Kafka using attack and speed, you're basically casting your net a lot wider, a lot further, compared to just using a tiny little net only aiming for a crit ratio. So in terms of resource efficiency, there's no reason for you to try to build crit Kafka when you have a whole other arsenal of attack and speed Kafka at your disposal, assuming that you didn't throw all of them away. Aside from the difficulty of procuring crit ratio gears, players also need to factor in that Kafka's benefit from crit is much lower than traditional DPS, since DOTs and DOTs trigger do not crit. You guys can take a look over here in this chart that CM Bros have generated. 直接伤害 is the part where Kafka do benefit from crit, because 直接伤害 is the initial damage, right? Which makes up only a small portion of Kafka's total damage output in comparison to 其他伤害, which is other damage. This is because other damage from Kafka includes her massive 290% ultimate DOT multiplier, as well as DOT triggers from all other sources. As you guys can see over here, a rough translation, this basically means Kafka's crit ratio benefits is equivalent to 1/3 of the benefit from other units such as Silly, right? This kind of traditional crit ratio units. And this can be seen from the DPS breakdown over here, right? You guys can see, 直接伤害 it only composes of 29.28% of Kafka's total outgoing damage. So aside from Kafka's initial damage, there's break damage taking up 11%, there's DOT damage taking up 20%, and then there's DOT trigger damage taking up 31%. So all these 71% of Kafka's outgoing damage, they all cannot benefit from crit ratio whatsoever. So when you want to build crit ratio Kafka, just keep in mind that the only benefit you're giving her is gonna be this. It's gonna be 29% of her total damage output, right? So keep that in mind. Crit Ka scales poorly with time, because when future DOT units are released, Crit Ka is pretty much not gonna benefit from them, right? Because Crit Ka is meant to be played as a hyper carry without relying on other DOTs. Attack Ka, it will only scale better with more 5-star DOT units, because you can use attack Ka's DOTs to trigger alongside a 5-star DOT units, right? So when you trigger all of them together, the DOT damage is just going to be absolutely insane. So while attack Ka will only get better with time, crit Ka, it will stagnate when they remain in this same degree of development. In conclusion, attack/speed Kafka is going to be better than crit Kafka in both stamina requirement and DPS output. Although crit Kafka, it is perfectly viable, right? It is perfectly viable to clear MOC 10. I've already seen a ton of crit Kafka clearing MOC 10 with absolutely 0 turns from the CM player base. So saying that crit Kafka is absolutely rubbish is definitely not true. It is viable. But what is viable is different from what is optimal, which is the main argument I'm saying over here, right? If you're going to be spending a lot more resources trying to create a build for Kafka that gives you like sub-optimal results in terms of output and all this kind of stuff, then you got to ask yourself, is it the optimal build? Right, so that is that for attack versus crit Kafka. Now, with all this being said, I do want to say one thing. In the final endgame, where Kafka has close to 0 wasted subs, in this scenario, right, in the ultimate endgame, the best in slot build for Kafka would actually be a hybrid Kafka, right? Having every single substat and main stat allocated into crit ratios, attack percentage, and speed all at once. Now, this is close to impossible for majority of the player base because it requires you to have absolutely almost no wasted subs whatsoever. But the damage output is undeniably higher than an attack Kafka because both attack and speed do have diminishing returns past a certain point, especially for attack when you consider that there's a lot of things in this game that buffs the unit's attack. So in this sense, investments into crit ratio actually make Kafka's DPS even higher compared to having all the rolls into attack and speed percentage. So a simple hybrid build for Kafka, if you guys want to attempt to build this yourself, it's going to be something like this, right? She still has around 3000 attack with high enough speed, 136 speed to go twice in the first turn with a crit rate of 61% and crit damage of 148%. Another build can be 3.3k attack with 135 speed with a slightly lower crit rate and crit damage. So these gears from the CM Bros they essentially have almost absolutely zero wasted subs, right? So you do need to consider the viability of building this hybrid Kafka build. Now moving on to Kafka's Lightcone Recommendations is going to be seen over here. Her signature Lightcone outperforms S5 Guna and Sleep Well, outperforms S5 Fermata, and outperforms S1 Weld signature Lightcone, with some other choices such as Resolution as well as Tutorial Mission. Right, so S5 Guna and Sleep Well is roughly 5% worse than Kafka's signature, and S5 Fermata is roughly 14% worse, while S1 Weld is roughly 17% worse. Resolution and Tutorial Lightcone, it is recommended to give it to Kafka's teammates instead of Kafka itself, such as Luca, Sampo, Pella, and Silverwolf, right? All these nihility units, so as to not affect Kafka's total damage output. She does want to be the one dealing all the damage right now. Maybe in the future, when better 5-star DOTs are released and they can be the main carry for the Kafka comp, then Kafka can actually consider using Resolution or even Tutorial Mission Begins to ensure a higher out time or even defense breaks, right? But this is going to be the general Lightcone recommendations for Kafka. Very, very straightforward. And I also want to take this time to say, if you already have an S5 Good Night and Sleep Well, I personally don't think there is a need to pull for S1 whatsoever, because you're basically just losing 5% damage for a hell of a lot Stellar Jade investments, right? So because of Goodnight Sleep Well being such an amazing Lightcone for nihility units, Kafka's Lightcone's value does increase a little bit as compared to other 5-star Lightcones, right? Such as Before Dawn or Sileys in the Night, right? So that's that for Kafka's Lightcone recommendations. Now we have come to the final segment, which is Kafka's team composition. And because of how long this video already is, and because of how long this team composition is going to take, because there is a lot of different compositions of Kafka. As you guys can see over here, CM Bros have done a lot of math when it comes to the damage output, right? We're going to be exploring this much more in depth in another video. This video, I'm just going to go through you guys the general team compositions that Kafka can make. The main topics for the future video is more focused on who to pair with Kafka in terms of raw damage output. And we basically have this 4 simulations that CM Bros have run. It's going to be Kafka plus Silverwolf, Kafka plus Asta, Kafka plus Sampo, and Kafka plus Luca. Right? So these 4 scenarios, and we're going to be exploring them in the future video. Now, moving on to the topic for today's video, right? This is one of the team comps that Kafka can run. It's going to be Kafka plus Tingyun plus Asta plus a healer. Now, this composition has higher survivability than Kafka plus DOT because both Asta and Tingyun can be built as tanks. After Tingyun has achieved roughly 2.5k attack, she can allocate the rest of her subsets all into HP, defense, and all this kind of good stuff, right? In terms of survivability, this team is going to be the tankiest out of all the comps. It also has much less resource investment needed as compared to raising brand new DOT units, right? But like, for example, if you want to play Kafka and you have never raised Sampo, you have not raised Luca, you pretty much have to build new units from scratch, whereas for Tingyun and Asta, they're probably already built since the start of the game because there's such a universal support. And this kind of ties on to the next point. This team is a little bit more future-proof than other DOTs, since Tingyun and Asta, they can transition and pivot into an alternative team if a future fighter DOT wants to join Kafka herself, right? That being said, this team is also Crit Kafka's best setup, since Crit Kafka does not need to rely on DOTs whatsoever, right? So you can just use Tingyun, you can use Asta, heck, you can even use Bronya to give it to Kafka. So this kind of Crit Kafka, 2 support plus 1 healer is going to be the best setup. Now moving on to the second team setup is going to be a Kafka plus a DOT plus a support plus a healer. Now in this setup, you can either choose Luca and Sampo depending on the situation. Luca for single target and Sampo for multi-target. Now the total DPS output for this composition is going to be higher than Tingyun and Asta over here because Kafka does benefit very well from DOT triggers. With that being said, this team is ultimately squishier than the previous team because Luca and Sampo, they need to focus on attack and speed, and to a certain extent even EHR, as compared to HP and defense like Tingyun, because Tingyun, once you reach enough attack with her and enough speed with her, you can just stack the rest of the stats into defensive subs, right? So Luca and Sampo can be a little bit squishier than Tingyun in that regard. Also, this team is also a little bit less future-proof, since there's a very good chance that a future 5-star DOT unit can replace whatever Luca and Sampo is doing, right? Note that Servo is not included in this composition by the CM Bros because her low DOT scaling as well as the preference for crit ratio doesn't make her like a DOT applier, right? Servo is more like it's pretty much like a mini Jingyuan because her tracers and her abilities, they're already focused on crit and direct damage, right? She's really not that strong when it comes to DOTs herself. So in terms of DOT, it's mostly going to be Luca and Sampo. Now for the final team composition, is actually going to be pretty interesting and not advisable for new players which your relics are not developed enough. It's going to be Kafka plus 2 DOTs plus a healer. Now, theoretically, this has the highest damage ceiling even without Asta, because Kafka can instantly trigger any DOTs applied by the entire team. So this is going to be the highest theoretical damage output. Both Luca and Sampo here, they can actually be pretty skill point efficient, cycling between the skills and auto attack. For example, he can proc Wind Shear with just basic attack alone because his basic attack marks up to 3 stacks of Wind Shear. Whereas for Luca, he can use his enhanced attack to deal toughness bar damage and then cycling with skill, enhanced attack, skill, enhanced attack, right? So, and all these units, these DOT units, they can synergize very well because Sampo's ultimate is increased damage taken for DOTs, while Luca's ultimate is increased damage taken for all sources, right? So once you synchronize all of this, Kafka's personal damage from the trigger is going to be really high after factoring Luca and Sampo's ultimates. Now, of course, the reason why I said you do need a little bit better relic quality is because this is going to be the squishiest comp out of all 3 comps, since both Luca and Sampo, they are building attack and speed. You can consider equipping Luca and Sampo with Fleetless instead of like Space Healing Station, because Fleetless, they can stack. Right, so once Luca and Sampo, and if you want to include a healer, that's going to be 3 Fleetless stacking all together, and there's going to be a global 24% attack buff to everybody, right? So you can consider stacking Fleetless to make them a little bit tankier, since Fleetless does give them more HP. And with that, we have come to the end of today's video. I hope you guys enjoy the content today, and I hope you guys appreciate the new format. Stay tuned for Kafka's team composition, as well as all the content that we're gonna make for Kafka. And if you guys need more discussions, feel free to join Poki's Village, right? We already have almost close to 3,000 members. If you guys want to catch my stream, head on to twitch.tv/MrPoki. So with that, we have come to the end of today's content, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.